Solar Philippines Nueva Ecija Corporation, the developer of what could soon be Southeast Asia's largest solar project, is looking to raise as much as 2.7 billion pesos in an IPO scheduled for next month. Joining us this morning is the company's 28-year-old boss, Leandro Leviste. Hi, Leandro. Good morning. Good to see you again.
Hi, Mimi. Good to see you again, too.
Okay, tell us more about your upcoming IPO. I mean, what can this money do for you, and how long can this last you for? I understand it's going to fund just the first phase, the first 50 megawatt out of the 500 megawatt project.
Yeah, so if you can see my background, is over 350 hectares where we plan to build what will eventually be the largest solar project in Southeast Asia, with the proceeds of this IPO going partly to the equity portion of the first 225 megawatts, and with management seeing that it would actually be even better to use the other half of the potential maximum proceeds to fund the acquisition of land for an expansion beyond 500 megawatts. Because it is our aspiration that beyond 500 megawatts, this could actually become not just the largest in Southeast Asia, but one of the largest in the world.
Oh, wow. Okay. But the 2.7 billion, do you imagine you're going to need to tap the equity markets again after that? I mean, that's just about 10% of the 500 megawatts that's not yet expanded.
So to be precise, the first 1.3 of proceeds will fund 100% of the cost of the first 50 megawatts, or 25 or so percent of the cost of the first 225 megawatts. Okay. And as with our other projects, once we advance the construction of the first part of the plant, we are able to get the debt financing on better terms than if it were a completely greenfield financing. And we would like to emphasize that when implementing a solar project, it is the interconnection of the plant to the national grid that is often the most delicate part of execution. But once you are connected, the addition of more solar panels is a relatively easy construction process.
All right, Leandro, I'm very curious. Could you tell us what the environment is like for you and how it's been for your project over the last 2 years during the pandemic?
The pandemic has inspired more interest in renewable energy, with the Philippine stock market itself being evidence of that. And the DOE's policies for increasing the renewable portfolio standard quota to 2.52% per year to a total of 30% by 2030 or more actually means that the pandemic could have perhaps accelerated the energy transition in the Philippines.
Because right now, I understand RE accounts for about a little over 20% of the country's total energy supply. The target, as you mentioned, is to go up to 35 by 2030, around 56 by 2040. Do you think this target is doable, Leandro? I mean, from someone inside, do you think this is doable? Is the regulatory framework in place and ready for that? Is it giving it support, or proving to be a hindrance to guys like you who needs to get things done?
We actually laud the very forward-looking policies of the DOE to create the demand. And the short answer as to the constraint is that it's really on the end of the supply. Because if you were to translate what a total of 35% by 2030 means, that's going to mean that there has to be more than 20 gigawatts of additional solar built in the Philippines based on certain assumptions. And there is not even 20 gigawatts of solar being developed in the Philippines right now because of the lack of land and transmission. And that is the main value proposition of the company that we are putting forward, because over the last 5 years, we have been securing and getting the permits for the land and transmission for this project.
Leandro, when you look at the RE mix right now, hydro, I understand, is still the biggest contributor, 15%. Geothermal is at 8%, solar is at 4%, and wind is at 2%. Biomass, 1.4%. I'm not sure if these numbers are still accurate, but as of 2019, 2020, this is the data from DOE. It's no wonder why, okay, let me ask you, why do you think solar and wind contribute the smallest, make the smallest contribution?
So it's starting from a small base because the technology is newer than hydro and geothermal.
Okay.
But I wish to emphasize the earlier point that renewable energy capacity additions, especially for hydro and geothermal, are limited by supply and not demand. All of the good resources that can be harnessed will be harnessed, like with solar and wind. So again, before the DOE came out with this renewable portfolio standard, the problem was demand. Now that they have this RPS, the problem will be who can come up with a supply.
Mm-hmm. But when you've got the supply, you'll need the storage. Do we have the mechanism, the storage facilities to store sunlight from solar?
As you noted, with solar currently being, let's say, 2 to 3% of the total energy of the Philippines, we have a long way to go to get to the, let's say, 10 to 15% level at which in other countries, large-scale storage will need to be applied. And it is our estimation, by the time we get to that 10 to 15% solar penetration in the Philippines, the cost of storage will fall well below $200,000 per megawatt hour, at which it becomes the most competitive source, along with solar, for the mid-merit requirements of the Philippines.
And what about the environmental cost? You've got some critics, Leandro, questioning how the batteries have hidden costs to the environment. I mean, they're not net zero. I mean, you have to mine plenty of metals and minerals, lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel, all creating harm to the surroundings. And once they're exhausted, once the life is used up, disposal is also problematic because these are essentially toxic wastes. What do you say to that?
When I visited the factories of Tesla, LG, and Samsung in 2017, they all made it very clear that the batteries could be recycled. And I understand that there are already recycling facilities in all of these manufacturing plants. So the old lithium-ion batteries are currently going in to the new ones that are going off of the assembly line.
Okay. And another thing I wanted to ask, I know there's such a thing as a real-world capacity factor that of approximately 30%. I'm not sure if this is accurate in your case. So when you say a project can provide X amount, you have to divide that by 3. That is what is actually produced. Is that accurate, Leandro?
That's why you need to build a larger capacity to make the same amount of energy. With the solar project generating around 4 hours of generation per day, it would mean that to supply, let's say, 100 megawatts of 24-hour power, you would need to build 600 megawatts of solar.
Yeah. Isn't that a challenge to the business model? I mean, you're going to need a larger capacity just to produce the same amount of energy.
But in terms of the all-in cost, it's actually lower than fossil fuel now, because if the capital cost for a coal plant is, let's say, 2 million per megawatt, and for solar is around $500,000 per megawatt, then the fact that it's producing at, let's say, 1/5 on average of the energy is partly offset by the lower capex, in addition to the fact that, let's say, 1/3 to 1/2 of the production cost of a coal plant is in operational costs, mostly fuel. So when you add the capex and you add the OPEX, on a levelized cost of electricity, solar without batteries is significantly lower than other sources. And we're claiming that even with batteries in the coming years will be even cheaper than coal.
Wow. Okay. The future certainly is bright. Leandro, final question. There's currently a euphoria over renewable energy at the moment. We're coming fresh from COP26. There's a lot of clamor for ESG investing right now. Are you feeling it? Are investors left and right trying to get a hold of you, to get in on your project, to partner with you perhaps?
Well, that's part of why we are doing this. Also part of why we're seeing so much demand for solar that some of the other sites that we have developed for our own use, we are now entering into partnerships with the country's leading power companies, because all of the guys who used to think that solar was not viable have changed their minds. And I think very, very soon, all of the country's power companies will be going into solar, and we'd be very glad to help them enter the market so that we can together make solar the largest source of energy in the Philippines.
Are you looking at potential M&As?
We are entering into joint ventures in our projects with all of these companies that are approaching us. And again, we think that this is a key to make sure that solar will become the mainstream source of energy in the Philippines.
Okay, and on that sunny note, thank you very much, Leandro, for joining us. Good luck. We will definitely be covering your IPO next month. You have to be back on the show.
Thank you, Mimi. We will. Thank you.
Okay. Now,